I apologize for interrupting. Councilmember Scott, will you please start over?
Yes. I move to reduce the salaries and benefits in the police department in the general fund by $4.5 million and reapportion those funds to the following categories. $3.5 million to the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund for the purposes of funding the reconstruction and relocation of Fire Station 5 and Ward 5. $715,000 to the Capital Fund for stormwater drainage and storm sewer systems projects. $235,000 for the implementation of an internal audit function, and $50,000 to the police department to provide funding for additional officer sensitivity training. Okay, thank you, Councilmember Wilson, for your comments. Like I said, that Ward 5 is where that Fire Station 5 is at. It is, they're, as you know, tax-paying citizens who often speak about how they do not receive the same services. This amendment basically cuts the salary and benefits of the police department in half. And while I don't expect it to pass, I do expect it to cause a conversation about those very things, about how we solve this problem. And so thank you. You're about to hear me. I don't always speak at length at the council meetings. I'm usually pretty concise, but I do want you guys to hear my perspective and my experience in the city of Norman. Beginning, and I saw on our slide earlier from the presentation from our chief that Grand Prairie, Texas was also on the slide. When I was in my senior year in Grand Prairie, I witnessed from the passenger seat of my friend's vehicle a gun pulled on my friend in the driver's seat by an officer because he wouldn't give the officer his ID. In 2013, in Norman, Oklahoma, my friend's home was burglarized. They called the police. The officer proceeded to conduct a criminal interrogation on the victim, a black man, asking if he sold drugs and accusing them of such. Not only did that happen, was he dismissed, but there was also no follow-up on the investigation of his home, which was burglarized. In 2014, there was a rape outside of the establishment that I used to work at, not of me, but by my friend. There was no follow-up and no justice. In September of 2015, on the first day of the last semester of my senior year of my undergraduate degree, I was assaulted in the street by my home in the Miller District, Ward 4. I called the police and gave them details of the assault as well as the make, model, and license plate of the vehicle to search for, and the officer, after taking my report, proceeded to turn off his recording device and tell me that sex crimes are not treated as a priority in the city of Norman. Unless you deface property or try to pass a hot check, the case would not take priority. And there was no follow-up. When I was a teacher at Moore High School in 2016, there was a student who was clearly suffering from mental health issues that busted into my classroom, screaming and crying for help, as the student resource officer grabbed him and dragged him out my first period. In 2017, on April 20th, at Moore High School when I was a teacher, one of my freshman Latinx students told me that the student resource officer stopped him and frisked him on his way back from lunch, suspecting that he had cannabis on him. He did not. That was my 5th hour of freshman. In 2018, Marconia Kessie was dragged, dehumanized, and his life was disregarded. And as I spoke earlier, this is a violation of those 8 can't wait, the duty to intervene by the police officer who witnessed the other one violate the use of force continuum. Kessie died in police custody, and this affects me personally as it affects our community. Here's 2020. I received a phone call from an Indigenous mother whose daughter was violently raped. Her 19-year-old daughter was disbelieved, disrespected, and disregarded by Officer Barber, who told her at Norman Regional Hospital that she shouldn't have been drinking. In 2020, during the pandemic, there was an email that circulated our Norman Police Department that displayed white supremacist and KKK imagery. I would again commend the officer that condemned this behavior and brought it to their attention so that it could be addressed by the department. The investigation was internal. And again, this is personal for me because it is personal for our community. And this is very personal, this next piece. I called the Norman Police Department in late May, due to a situation I was experiencing with a stalker. I called roughly 11:35 in the night on a Tuesday night, and 2 officers showed up pretty quickly, no masks until I asked, and then I told them my 6-week-long experience. They remained silent. I mentioned that I had a witness, but it wasn't until I called Major Jackson in the middle of the night that they began taking a report of the incident. When I asked them to ask my neighbor, when they blatantly disbelieved me on my doorstep about my experience as a victim, and asked them to ask my neighbor, an eyewitness, they said, "Do you want us to wake her up in the middle of the night?" And I said, "Yes." I mentioned overtime earlier. There were 2 officers who showed up on my doorstep and said, well, this is the MO of this person, of the person who I said I believe to be stalking me in the middle of the night. This is their MO. So they weren't going to take any action until I called their further supervisor, the Major Jackson, who did promptly speak to them, and they took a report then, and then sent Officer Vincent to my home, who did go indeed wake up my neighbor in the middle of the night. But when Officer Vincent showed up, he asked, "Is there anything, what's going on?" And the officer said, "We're about wrapped up here." He said, he asked me, he goes, "Counselor, how are you?" "Not good." "Okay. And then is there anything else?" I said, "Yeah, I think these guys need some sensitivity training." Because before he got there, I asked, "Why do you think I'm frustrated?" And they said, "You don't like us. You don't like police." And I said, "Try again." And then he said, "Because you're being stalked and we didn't catch the guy." And I was very close. It was very close. So we did come, Officer Vincent did go and wake up my neighbor, who gave a witness account to this experience that for weeks, that I had been stalked. And when we came back to my place, to my home, he told me that I would be well taken care of, and I appreciate that. I am a city councilor. I had to make it clear on my doorstep. I had to call the major in order for me to be taken seriously in a low-income, high-crime neighborhood, just to be believed by people that I pay and represent, frankly. And I, putting myself aside, pleaded with him that if it weren't me, if I weren't a white woman, if I weren't a white counselor, what would have happened? Who else is experiencing this? Who was being disbelieved? Who was being further endangered? I was endangered on my doorstep. And it wasn't until the next day that the major, again, thank you. I got a call from Detective Kelly. Thank you, by the way, Detective Kelly, for following up with me again weeks later, the first time I've been followed up with, when I have been assaulted on more than one occasion. Like I told you, in 2015, I was assaulted and there was no follow-up. But Officer Kelly followed up with me this time. The major and Officer Casillas, again, thank you. Officer Casillas came to my home and exposed all of the weak places in my house, and accidentally also opened up my neighbor's window. So I bought her a window alarm as well. And Mayor Clark also immediately, when she found out, when I told her when I had to exit that council meeting, sent her husband over to my home to install lights so that I would be further protected. I'm in a very, very privileged position, and there are many who are not, who are experiencing this. And if I am being disbelieved, disregarded on my doorstep, then there is much worse going on. And that's why I made this amendment, is to have this conversation. Because the purpose of our police is to protect and to serve, and if property is taking a higher priority than my body, then they are not upholding their pledge. So I'm willing to accept amendments.